Hey everyone! This time we read All Your Base Are Belong to Us by Harold Goldberg. There's a lot of really good stuff in this book, and it's presented in a really nice way. It's a very easy to read book, especially for one that goes over history. So I really like about the first 200 pages or so of this book, and then the last about 70 to 100 pages I don't really like that much. There is one section on the Wii that I do like, and then the final conclusion where he goes into like the future of video games, I didn't really care for that one too much. This is one of the books that I kind of wish I had read back when it came out. It was published in 2011, so I'm trying to keep myself in that mindset while I'm reading it. It's a really good book when it's laying out a lot of the history up until about 2000 or so, and then it sort of goes into a weird direction, and that's really like the last part of the book that I didn't really like that much, because once you look back at it from a little bit of a farther perspective, it doesn't quite hold up to what Harold was saying. The first few chapters are really well detailed, and I think Harold did a really great job with them. He basically recounts video game history, starting with Ralph Baer and moving up throughout the 80s. One thing I didn't quite like that much is him starting with Baer. I would have rather seen him start with Higginbottom, but he doesn't do that. He does mention sort of the Tennis for Two game that was made, but that's not really his starting point. I kind of get what he's talking about, because he's starting with home consoles and not really computer games. And that's really one of the problems with this, is he doesn't really seem to pay that much attention to computer games. I mean, he mentions that Pong was the first like arcade game, which I think he should have added the qualifier, the first successful arcade game, because Bushnell had put out an arcade game before that. And it's just kind of a weird thing. He does eventually talk about computer space and space war, but that's not really up front when we're talking about Bushnell's motivations. And I think it should have been probably more of a focus. At least that's my own opinion. Most of my issues with the first part of this are really kind of minor, and it's just because I would do things a little bit differently if I was writing this book. What Harold does is he picks out certain games and certain events in history that sort of fit into the narrative that he's telling. A lot of historians do this, and it's an easy way to kind of get through a long period of time with history. In this case, about 50 years or so. That's actually one of the cool things about video game history, is you can do that, and you can pick out certain moments within video game history, like certain games or certain companies, and you can tell your own story, which is kind of a fun thing to do. Mine would definitely look different from Harold's, and I'm sure yours would probably look different from both of them. I understand what he's doing, and he's trying to lead the reader in a certain direction, and that's towards his argument about really movies and video games, and how video games are becoming like movies, and they're slowly overtaking at least the movie industry, or he thought they would be doing that. Even though I didn't like this part, he mentions two things which I found very interesting, and that was The Seventh Guest and Phantasmagoria. In talking about these two games, it allows him to transition into how full motion video became a thing for video games, especially when you go to like computers or to other systems that could actually handle full motion video. So while I understand the transition to really talk about this, it kind of comes across as him making this feel more important than what it really was. At the end of the day, these are video games, and they're supposed to be entertaining. At least that's what my impression of them is. You can be a little bit more artistic and a little bit more creative, but when you talk about it as this kind of high art thing, that's where you just sort of lose me, and I'm like, I just don't really care that much about what you're talking about. I just want to play something fun. So we transition from Phantasmagoria and The Seventh Guest, which those chapters are really more about those companies falling apart, which I feel like those were much better stories to tell than really the progression of technology. So we go from that into a conversation about how writing in video games became like more important and story became more important. He talks about how the slow progression of that throughout the late 90s and into the 2000s, and he uses BioShock as an example, which I think is a really good example, and it sort of shows you how you could tell sort of like a spooky narrative inside like a first-person shooter that has some elements of other things as well. It's a nice transition, but I have problems with it and what comes after it. So what comes after it, I kind of feel like is something that Harold tries to make sound way more important than what it really was. He talks about people leaving Electronic Arts, specifically the founder of Maxis and the creator of SimCity. That doesn't really mean anything to me. Maybe it mattered a lot back in 2009 when it happened. Reading it in 2020, I'm kind of like, well, of course that happened. EA just shuts stuff down after they ruin franchises. They shut down those studios and move on with their day because they don't give a shit about the customer or the people that work there. So while he's doing that, I just sort of was like, I don't know who this guy is. I don't believe you when you said it shocked the video game industry. I'm sure it shocked, like the people that wanted his job or the people that, were writing articles about it. But I seriously doubt the average gamer was like, oh my god, this guy left? I just seriously doubt that happened. And in today's day and age, I feel like that stuff is just way overblown. Where it's like, okay, this guy who created a great franchise like 20 years ago and has continued to make games, he's leaving a company. It's sort of like, okay, yeah, that's, maybe it's just my perspective. It's like, okay, yeah, that's fine. But Harold tries to make it sound like it was this earth-shattering thing, and it just totally fell flat for me, because when you throw out language like, this shook the video game industry, I'm like, I don't think it did. So you need to present something that tells me this did what you're telling me. You need to show me, like, hey, here are a bunch of articles where, it was written, here's the reaction from people who buy video games, here's this. And I got none of that, and I was just sort of like, okay, I mean, I can take your word for it, but really that part, and then his talks about how, his talks about video game writing, and it just him making, or at least trying to make it sound like it's this huge high art now, those were the parts where I was just like, this has turned from something I enjoy reading to something that I just really did not like to read at all. That being said, I did enjoy the book, or at least I enjoyed the majority of the book. So it's a good one. I would recommend people read it. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. Just, you'll probably have a different reaction than I did. So I did enjoy most of the book. Again, it's got problems, but they're not like huge glaring ones that would cause you to just like shut the book and leave and never go back to it. It's a nice book. It presents the information it has in a really nice way. And I think Harold did a great job with it. So yeah, I would recommend reading this, because it's not a bad book at all. It's a pretty good one. Maybe I just read it at the wrong time, or wasn't reading it with the right mindset or something. Just those last couple of chapters, I just got really upset while I was reading them. So anyway, that's going to wrap it up, guys. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a great day, everyone.